Hi, I'm Manny Fitzsimmons. I'm your Washington REALTORS Legal Hotline Lawyer, and this is another video in our series entitled A Fresh Look at Fair Housing. And in this video series, I'm grateful to be joined once again by my subject matter experts.
I'm Adria Buchanan. I'm the Executive Director of the Fair Housing Center of Washington.
And I'm Deborah Blom, and I'm a realtor in Clark County.
In this video, we want to talk about advertising compliant with the Fair Housing Act. And it breaks down into two different categories of conversation in my mind: advertising the property and the broker advertising their own services. And both of these categories have kind of an overarching theme, if you will. When you're advertising property compliant with the Fair Housing Act, you have to be careful that what you are advertising is the features of the property and not your expectation of who the buyer for this property will be. And when you're advertising your own services as a real estate broker, you are describing your experience, your education, the services that you will provide a client or a consumer, but you're not advertising your clientele. So let's look at both of those kind of broad categories: advertising the property, describing the features and not the buyer. What's your experience, Deborah?
Yeah, absolutely. So, obviously my job as a realtor is to get the house sold when I have a listing, and there is a specific type of buyer for each house, but it's about the use of the property and what the property actually provides to that buyer. So if I'm selling a single level home, I'm not going to try to fish for somebody who's elderly to buy it. I'm going to describe that the home is single level and that it has no stairs, and describe the features of the room that will make the property accessible for that buyer and any other buyer. If it's close to something that people are going to like using, such as a park or a school, I'm not gearing that towards family. I'm describing that there's a park that anyone is available to use.
Okay, makes sense. What about distance to parks? I know there's sometimes words that we want to avoid in advertising, and one of those is to say walking distance, for example. How would you characterize?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that giving specific measurements, the more that you can make it about physical facts and concrete details, the better. That leaves it for somebody else to read and interpret for themselves, as opposed to you projecting your own thoughts onto the listing. So I think it's really important to use half a mile or 2 blocks or whatever, give some sort of frame of measure as opposed to walking distance.
Okay, that makes sense to me.
Yeah, no, I like that also, because you think about what are the range of potential buyers, right? And so walking distance to someone, with a mobility issue, maybe for someone who is in a walker, 2 blocks seems like a really long distance. Whereas someone who's in a wheelchair, it's like, man, I've got this, and they're zooming down. So I think that it's important to think about, again, what are the features of the property? How far is it from different amenities? And not limit your perception of who you think the buyer can be.
Adria, one thing that we see within our industry is that some MLSs, probably even some firms, have policies that restrict use of certain words within advertising. For example, there are some restrictions in some cases on the use of the word family, depending on the context and how it's used. We now refer to a principal bedroom or bedroom number 1 versus older language around that subject. Do you see any complaints or deal with any experiences of buyers where advertising creates issues for them?
Sure. So I won't say that it doesn't exist, because we don't know all the listings that are out there, but we don't see it as much. We don't get a lot of complaints about listings in particular. We do see on the rental side, we do see a lot of issues with how rental properties are being advertised. But in terms of what's on the MLS, we don't see as many issues there. But I do think, sometimes people are hesitant, and when advertising a property, people can err on the side of caution, and so they don't put as much information in the listing. And I think it's important to say what the amenities are, and if there is shopping nearby, or if there is kind of landmark amenities, that those things should be listed, and for people to not think, oh, well, I don't want to put that in the listing because I don't want to try to signal to a particular buyer, when in fact you're just describing what's in the neighborhood. Mm-hmm. And for some people, they want to know, what are the landmark things? If there's a movie theater, tell me there's a movie theater, and to be specific where you think it makes sense, and to be more general where you think there may be the perception that you're looking for a specific buyer.
For example, mm-hmm. If you're close to both a Fred Meyer and a Whole Foods, say close to shopping, as opposed to signaling to a potential buyer by differentiating which stores are close by.
But you even could, is what you're saying. If you think that's a selling feature, what you're saying is you prefer to be more neutral in your advertising language. And I think I heard you say, but if you want to give that specific, as long as it's factual, mm-hmm. right? You can say that. So one of the things that comes up from time to time, and most people don't have to give directions to properties anymore. You can put in an address and your GPS takes you there. But I've seen landmarks used in giving directions sometimes that makes me scratch my head and say, why would you say go to the Catholic Church and turn right versus go to Oak Street and turn right, for example? And so that would be where I kind of see your ideas marrying up, neutral mm-hmm. in language like that. But if what you're trying to describe is the features of the property or what's accessible to this property, name it if mm-hmm. that's important.
Yeah. And that's where doing your research really mm-hmm. comes into play, right? Because you don't want to just name the things that you know are there, right? Because there could be other religious institutions that are in that area too, and now you haven't named those, right? So I think what Deborah's saying makes sense as far as, in order to ensure that you're being as neutral as possible, if you don't know exactly what's in the neighborhood, mm-hmm. Make it more general and say that there are, places of worship, or, that there are grocery stores nearby, so that people can see themselves in that property.
Mm-hmm. Great. Adria, I would love to get your perspective on an issue that always generates debate in fair housing classes. And that is use of terms such as, there's a great view from this property, or this property includes a walk-in closet. And the concern around phrases such as those is that somebody who is sight impaired might not have a view at all from this property. And so is it wrong to describe a property as having a great view? Mm-hmm. Or if a bedroom has a walk-in closet and that's a feature of this bedroom, can you describe that closet as a walk-in closet, even though some individuals may not be able to walk into that closet? How do you feel about those?
Yeah, it's tough. I think, we're in a world where we're trying to be increasingly more inclusive. And so thinking about, how do you do that without also, again, limiting unnecessarily the features of the property. Mm-hmm. And so in that specific situation, of the walk-in closet, I would name, how big is the closet? And, is it a closet where there's an island in the middle and, so someone has to kind of walk around and navigate around that? Is it a closet where, you walk in and there's lots of space immediately, so someone potentially with a wheelchair or with a walker can easily navigate in that closet? I think it's just important to name, again, the facts, what it is, and let people make their own determination about if that's going to work for them or not. And I think with the example of the view, we live in the Pacific Northwest, we do, I know that people watching this video may live elsewhere. But, if you're in a place and you're selling a property that has big windows and you can see, the mountains or the trees or whatever, I think it's important to say what those windows lead to. If it leads to the back of someone else's house, that's something that a potential buyer has to consider, right? And so you want to let them know, if you look out a window, what does it lead to, right? And people who have sight impairment, they may have other people in the home that they're living with that don't, and so those amenities are important to them as well. And so I think, again, listing what the amenities are allows everybody who's part of that decision-making process to determine if it's going to work for them or not.
And I think that going back to that specific example, it adds value to the property. And so in terms of resale, that's going to be a factor for any buyer. They want to know whether or not there's a view because it adds value. The same as being near to trails may add value for one buyer and may not add value for another, but it's still an important piece of the property to describe and disclose.
That's a good example. Yeah, because trails are not going to be used by everybody in the same way.
Yeah.
But it's still a fact. What about the question, the age-old question of, is this property in a good school district? Or is this a safe neighborhood? What do you do? What do you do when you get a question like that?
Well, I have kind of a standard answer for the school question of, I think all the schools in our area are great. But if you want to do additional research, I direct them to, you can look at Great Schools or whatever other website. But I think all the schools in our area are great. And I really do think that we have better than average schools in our state and in our area. And so that's an easy answer for me. The safety of the neighborhood is always the trickier question. But I think that the best thing for us to do is to ask the follow-up question of, well, what do you mean by safe? And then from there, we can redirect back to factual information and third-party sources for the buyer to do their own due diligence.
Okay, good. I have an additional thought on schools. Do you want to jump in first?
No. Happy to hear what you have to say.
Because not everybody has a situation where they really truly believe all the schools in their neighborhood are good. And one of the things that I think requires, and it's the same thing as just, what do you mean by safe?
Mm-hmm.
If Adria asks me, are these schools good? I might answer her question from my perspective of, yes, they are really good schools because my kids were into drama. And there's a huge drama program in the schools. Their academics are terrible, but man, that drama program is amazing. Right. Or Deborah might be looking at it from, my kids are really into sports. And so that's what's important. And their sports program might be great or not great. And so it's still the same question of, buyer, I can't define for you what is a good school, but here's what I can do. I can give you, the website for Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction for Washington State. You can get all their statistics for all of the school districts. I can give you phone numbers for superintendents and principals, and you can go talk about their drama program or their sports program. I can help you find PTA presidents if you want to find out whether or not parental involvement is something in the, and so same thing as with safe neighborhoods and schools. I mean, that's how I would analogize those two together.
For sure. And I think doing it that way limits your risk as the agent too, right? Because then, the buyer can't come back to you and say, oh, well, you told me that, X, Y, Z, and now, I've learned that it's not that way. And so, there was some misrepresentation, right? And so making sure that every step along the way, if they have questions that are really subjective, that they're making their own decision based on information that they've gathered themselves.
Yeah, you're right. I think it protects the broker, and it also provides a greater opportunity for the buyer to get the information that they actually need. But I have a question. Do you ever get pushback from a buyer? Do you ever do this and say, let me give you some resources, but not give you the direct answer? Do you ever get pushback from a buyer who says, come on, what are you here for?
Yeah, absolutely.
So how do you handle that?
I just let them know that fair housing is very important to me, and that what I define as a good school or a safe neighborhood is maybe not the same thing that they define, and that it's really important for them to feel comfortable. I'm not the one who's going to be using the house. They're the ones that are going to be using the house. They're the ones that are going to be attending those schools. So it's important for them to be comfortable with it, and I can't make them comfortable with it.
Okay, good. Some really good examples and discussion on this. So then the second broad area of advertising that many real estate brokers engage in is advertising their own services. And when you advertise your own services, you should advertise your education, your experience, your additional training, your background, your firm structure, your team structure, your resources, all of those things that add up to what makes you a good fit for any consumer, right? But you shouldn't advertise your clientele. And by what I mean by that is, it's never appropriate to say that we service the finest buyer or an elite clientele or something like that. That makes sense? Does that run conflict with anything that you see out in the industry?
No, I think it's very valid to get additional training. We're very lucky as realtors that we have access through both Washington REALTORS and the National Association that we can get additional endorsements. And that's important for buyers to know that we have gone out and educated ourselves. There's ones that are very specific to this. There are senior specialists. That's an endorsement. There's the veteran specialists, because there are unique needs when you have a military situation. And it's important for a broker to understand those things. But to say that you exclusively work with or make other people feel like they can't call you, I think that would be the defining characteristic.
That's a good distinction, though. You're right. There would be nothing wrong with advertising, at least in my opinion, saying that I am a senior specialist, especially if you can identify the criteria that makes you a senior. What additional training or experience do you have? Or a veteran specialist or new construction specialist. There's lots of different ways people want to describe themselves. Mm-hmm. Do you disagree with that?
No, I think what's important is that while people have these different specialties, they're not excluding potential clients, right? And so saying, well, I only work with these types of buyers, like you said, only elite buyers or only military families. You want to make sure that while you are, if you have specialty, you should highlight that, but you are also open to new business.
Great. That makes sense. If you have questions on anything we've discussed in this video or anything else, visit WARealtor.org and ask a question at the Legal Hotline Library. Thank you for being a Washington REALTORS member.